Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm Jeremy Lott. Joining me today is the Center Square's State House reporter, Brett Davis. So, Brett, I don't want to tax our listeners' time anymore, so let's talk about your latest article.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, you saw it coming a mile away. It's titled, Bill That Would Levy Excess Compensation Tax on Hospitals Introduced in Senate. How is that possible? What's happening in our state, Brett?
I would say this has something to do with the State Supreme Court's recent decision saying the capital gains tax is legal, is an excise tax that can be applied to income. I'm going to guess those two things are related. We're talking about Senate Bill 5767, which was introduced by Senator Christine Rolfs and Senator Emily Randall. And the way they explained it in the legislation is, I'm going to read part of it here just so I don't screw it up. The tax equals the sum of the annual total compensation of any covered employee that is paid excess compensation during the tax year, multiplied by 7.5%. Probably wondering, what exactly is excess compensation? So the bill defines that as the annual total compensation of a covered employee that exceeds 10 times the average wage most recently published as of December 31st of the tax year by the Employment Security Department. So if you make 10 times more than the average annual wage, you get hit with this 7.5% tax, assuming this legislation passes.
Yeah, and this is for healthcare executives in the state.
Yes.
We should mention that there's an ongoing fight between, on several levels, between the hospitals and the state. The hospitals are saying we're losing money hand over fist, and you're trying to pile other stuff onto us that's going to bankrupt a bunch of us. The state saying, you're not treating your employees right, or, various things. So this comes in the middle of that, them hitting back basically at the executives of the hospitals while they're at it.
So I reached out to Rolf's office to see if she had any comment on this, with regards to the capital gains tax. This was going to lead to more excise taxes or, taxes on income in the future. And her office did not get back to me.
Which is atypical for Rolf's office, by the way. They're actually...
Yeah, she has gotten back to me several times in the past, which is why I reached out to her.
They do typically respond to us, and we do appreciate that. So
we do. I assume they're super busy with budget stuff and other items as the session winds down.
Yeah, she's the architect of the budget, so I can understand why it would take time. But, so here's my sense of this legislation is that it's a trial balloon. It's probably not going to pass. Does that seem accurate or inaccurate?
Yes, that's what Senator John Braun suspected in a legislative event they held earlier this week. He basically said the same thing. He thought it was just basically sending a message. Although he did predict that during next year's session, we will see a slew of new excise tax proposals. Yeah.
So here's an interesting question, because our state is the only state that, when it came to capital gains, said that, yes, this is an excise tax rather than an income tax. Any other state and the federal government do any sort of taxing of capital gains, consider it income.
Right. We're the outlier.
We're the only place on God's green earth that says this is an excise tax.
Very unique state in this regard.
Yeah, so doing this, an excise tax on income, okay, so that's capital gains, but is there a precedent for excise taxes on income, or is this new ground as well?
It's new ground as far as I can tell. We had talked earlier about its impact on federal taxes. I'm curious to see how that plays out. To be honest, I have no idea what's going to happen there.
What we heard last was that the IRS said, well, okay, we're going to respect your definition, and if you're saying it's an excise tax and not an income tax, then we're not going to consider this income for the purpose of deducting from federal taxes. And so it's actually like a double hit for anyone who has to pay it.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the real world. It's one thing to play word games and change definitions, but when you actually have to sit down and do it, implement the policy, I guess we'll find out.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Brett Davis, this is Jeremy Lott. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.